Every single one of us are on a road or a highway. The Bible has described our lives like a road or a path or a highway in lots of places, Old and New Testaments alike. Even in the Disney Pixar Cars movie, Rascal Flatts said it well when they said, "Life is a highway." And before I get too much further, I should point out that the most important thing about this highway is that when you face Jesus Christ, like the great interchange where two highways depart from one another, when you face Jesus Christ, he said that he is the narrow road that leads to life. He said, "I am the way," that is the road, the truth, and the life. "No one comes to the Father but by me." And so if you haven't yet approached that fork, maybe today is that fork in the road for you. Maybe today is the is the day, like when you're traveling on 96 East and you want to go south on 23, you have to get in the correct lane, because if you're in the wrong lane, you're not going to get to where you want to go. And Jesus says, if your aim is to know the Father and arrive in heaven one day, I am the only road that gets there. Yes, that's narrow. Jesus said it was narrow. And he said, narrow is the way, and difficult is the way. Narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way, or straight is the way that leads to everlasting life. And that's one of our big jobs as a church, is to help everyone realize in as many ways as we possibly can, to point to that exit ramp, Jesus Christ, that interchange. One of the things Christians discover, and are often just surprised by, though, once they have chosen the narrow way of Jesus, is they are surprised at the hazards, the dangers, the uphill climbs, and the difficulty of navigating that road all the way to the celestial city. One of the best-selling books in the English language after the Bible is the great Puritan classic, Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan. The book pictures a believer named Christian, it's an allegory, along with another believer named Hopeful, who are on the road as pilgrims, making progress, hence the title, Pilgrim's Progress, toward the celestial city. And that's what these 15 psalms, these songs, remind us of, is that just as the Jewish people were a people on their way to heaven, and just as 3 times a year they would link up together and join one another from their various villages on the various roads that ascended to Jerusalem, that's why they're called the Songs of Ascent, or the Psalms of Ascent, we are on a road in life headed toward heaven. And what we sing matters. What we say, what we believe, what we read, what we rehearse, what we tell ourselves matters. And that's why these songs matter. Because we're learning as pilgrims that along this journey, we find some parallels between the difficulties and the hazards and the obstacles that the Jewish pilgrims may have faced 3,500 years ago, that are similar to the ones we face today. And so the question really that this psalm asks is, when you find yourself in a situation where you know your own resources fail to meet the need, where do you look for help? Where do I look for help? When I come to a place on my journey where I know I don't have what it takes. This psalm asks and answers that question. And there are very few more important questions to answer than that one. Where do you look when you need help in your marriage? Where do you look when what's going on in the lives of your kids point to your great need and inadequacy? Where do you look for help in financial reversal? Or when the doctor's prognosis is worse than expected? Where do you look for help when circumstances that you can't control are swirling around you, and you don't have inside of you what it takes to solve the problem in front of you. I refer you to the first two verses that we just read. I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. From whence cometh my help? My help cometh from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. When I need help, this is the key of today's message and today's psalm. When I need help, I can look with confidence to God, who not only rules over all things, but also knows me and loves me personally. This is true of every person seated in this room and of every person over the globe today who knows Jesus as their Savior. When you need help, and you will, you can look with confidence to God, who not only rules over all things, but knows you and loves you personally. One of the first things we should look at before we get too much further in this psalm is the fact that the guy did look for help, which is sometimes the place where you have to start, where many of us aren't wise enough to start. You got to look for help. You got to admit you need help. That's tough for people that are filled with pride and self-sufficiency, like many of us are. Josh Moody, writing about this psalm, said, "The idea that you can always fix everything yourself has caused the breakdown of more marriages, the heartbreak of more people, and the disaster of more businesses than perhaps any other idea on the face of the planet. Those who decide to go it alone and find the resources internally will pay a tragic price when the help that is needed can only come from outside of them." So we look to God. But how? How do you look for God? What does it mean to look to God? And why would you look to God? Is there any compelling argument that that would be the solution to the problem? Well, when you think about looking for God, to God for help, one of the great ways this psalm helps is it helps you meditate on what you should be thinking about when you think about the God who can help. A.W. Tozer said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." What comes into your mind when you think about God? When you think about your need and His help, this psalm is here to help you think correctly about God. Isn't that what church is about most Sundays? The lyrics we sing, the scriptures we read, the truths we teach. It's about helping us to think about God correctly. And when you come to this psalm, you learn three things about this God who is our help. First of all, you learn that we are looking to God as creator. In verses 3 and 4, the writer of the psalm looks to God as creator. And as creator, God is all-powerful. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, the creator. This writer of this song is bragging about God, about the God who has created all things. And surely if He has created the heavens and the earth, He can help me in the little area where I need help. This is not at the front of our minds when we read this psalm. But 3,500 years ago, this would have been at the front of the minds of the Jewish readers and singers of this song. And that is that the hills in Israel were known for something. And at this time in Israel's history, unfortunately, it is not a good thing they were known for. The hills were known for being the place where the idol worshipers would worship their pagan statues and mythological gods, deities, which were all, of course, made up, fictional, but to whom they pledged great worship and allegiance. The Jewish people weren't taught to do this except for by the nations around them. They had been taught to know and love the one true God who had created them, Jehovah God, who had called them as a nation and blessed them as a nation, and they found their identity in him as a nation. But just like we Christians have wandering eyes sometimes, the Jewish people, were looking at the way the neighbors around them were worshiping, and there was a little bit of an envy and a little bit of an intrigue, and they began adopting to the point that most people weren't worshiping Jehovah any longer. Most people had adopted the practices of the worshipers of Baal and Ashtaroth and a dozen other false deities from the nations around them. And what they would do is they would create groves. A grove was like an encampment in the hills in Israel, where they would plant trees and grow trees and erect statues and ordain priests for these false deities. And if you wanted to worship this deity, you would come there. And there was a lot of superstition involved. There was a lot of spells and magic involved. There was a lot of foolishness and even sensual wickedness taking place in this false worship. And people would go to worship in these places, and one of the reasons they would do it, this is really important for us, they were looking for help. If your ground wasn't producing crops, there was a God you could pray to who was said, superstitiously, to help make soil more fertile. There was also a God who would make people more fertile if you were having trouble conceiving, supposedly. And so if you didn't worship God as he deserved to be worshiped, you would go look for help in these other places. If you felt like the sun was going to dry out and kill your crops, you would go to the sun god's priest. You know the sun god's name? Amun-Ra. You would go to the sun god and you would offer an offering, and the priest of the sun god would tell you, you're good now. The sun won't ruin your crops. Now, this was, of course, a very disappointing experience for everyone involved because these gods were powerless to solve any problems. But it does remind you that we are as foolish today as they were then because we look for help in all the wrong places. There are people who need help. And instead of praying, they numb their grief with alcohol. If you can introduce me to one person who can credit alcohol with having solved their problems in life, I will change my opinion on this topic. But many people who suffer with alcoholism have fallen into that trap because of a coping with the problems that they can't find help for. We know that's true. Same thing with prescription drug addicts. There are other less obvious examples, people who are looking for the next promotion for the help they need, looking for the next relationship. Boy, can that one bring damage into people's lives. To solve the help that they think they need. Endless entertainment. All of these things are examples of how we sometimes go to places that are about as helpful as these silly statues in the hills around Israel. And they are about that helpful because they have nothing to offer us to solve our problems. But when others looked to the idols in the hills, the believers of Jehovah looked to the maker of the hills for their help. That's what the songwriter is saying. And when you think about the maker of the hills, you think about verses like Isaiah 46, where God says in chapter 46, verse 9, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, eternity past, eternity future, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. What God wants done gets done. God rules and reigns sovereignly over all things, including the details of your life. Job says that he's not just powerful, but he is great in power. Job also says that he is not only strong, he is mighty in strength. With this God available to us, why would we not look to this all-powerful Creator who produced all things out of nothing? When I see the stars, we sang this morning, and all of creation, it points to thy great faithfulness. And he holds all things together. We are all dependent on him for our next breath. In him, Acts 17:28, in him we live and move and have our being. He most likely is doing something around you that you can't see. God's picture is always larger than what we can see. His timing is always longer than we would understand, and his plan is always grander than we could have thought. But it requires faith. It requires looking to him to gain the perspective as we consider the help that we need from him. It's also possible that you may not have received the help you need because you haven't truly looked to him, or because you're not using the help he's already provided, or maybe the help may be in a different form or is coming in a different time than you would have expected. But we look to God as Creator, all-powerful. As we move through the song to verses 3 and 4, 5 and 6, we see that we also look to God not only as Creator, but also as Protector. God is not just a Creator, he is also the Protector of those he created. And he is always alert. There is a word used 8 times in this psalm to describe what God is and what God does for us. The Lord is thy keeper. Would you say that word with me out loud? The Lord is thy keeper. What does that mean? The keeper was the one who stood watch and guarded at the city gates or at the city wall. The one who was the keeper was the frontline protector that all the people depended on. And if there was ever a job that you must not fall asleep on, it's the job of the keeper of the city, the guard, or oftentimes called in the Bible, the watchman. And God says he is the watchman, he is the keeper, he is the guard, he is the protector in your life. If you're a hockey fan or if you're a soccer fan, you know that this word is continued in use today. The keeper, the goalie, guards the area. God is keeping watch over your life. And this verse says, he doesn't sleep nor slumber. I sometimes get tired. Life can do that to me, and I suspect it can to you as well. You know who never gets tired? God. Isn't that assuring? I sometimes feel like I've spread myself too thin and I'm overwhelmed. You know who never feels that way? God. What a joy, what a humbling thing, what a relief to know that that is the God we serve. He is protector and he is always alert. And again, the person singing this song 3,500 years ago in Jerusalem would contrast what the songwriter is saying about their God with the false gods of the nations. One of the things about Baal, one of the real popular false gods of the nations around Israel, was that he was known for taking long naps. And one of the jobs of his priests was to wake him up if someone needed something from him. And so they sang and they danced and they chanted and they stomped and they even cut themselves to try to get the attention of the god who was napping, Baal. You might remember the Bible story from 1 Kings chapter 18 when Elijah, the prophet of God, is challenging the prophets of Baal. He resented the fact that most of his nation was following this foolish, false, fictional God. And so he challenged the 400 prophets of Baal to meet him on Mount Carmel and to see who could call down fire from heaven. And he said, 400 of you against one of me. You summon the God of Baal, I'll summon Jehovah, we'll see who can call down fire from heaven. And so you go first. And so they worked at it. And they kind of had the cultural momentum. They kind of had the societal momentum in Israel. And they sang and they danced and they chanted. And what did Elijah say to them in 1 Kings 18:27? He mocked them and said, "Cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey, or peradventure by chance he sleepeth and must be awaked." Sarcasm is thick with Elijah. And of course, fire never fell. But when Elijah prayed his 17-second prayer to Jehovah God, the God who is real, and the God who does hear, sent fire. Isaiah 40, verse 28, "Have you not known, have you not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary?" I know that sometimes you feel God isn't close to your situation. I know. I've been there. But he's not asleep. He has not left his post. And he promises to guard you. The image that's being painted here for the singers of the song, is like if a child was afraid to go to sleep at night because they were scared of the monsters under the bed, and the mother or the father said, "Now, honey, here's what I'm going to do to help you go to sleep. I'm going to stay right here and watch over you." God is saying to us, "I'm watching over you, son. I'm watching over you, daughter. You can sleep because he does not." He is not only awake, but he is watching. One of the troubles of living a faith life, it says we walk by faith, not by sight. In 1 Corinthians, we walk by faith, not by sight. One of the troubles is we can't see God. And we struggle with that sometimes, and it's not surprising that we do, which is, by the way, sometimes why we'll turn on the TV instead of praying, or phone a friend instead of praying. But what if, though God cannot be seen, he sends word that he sees you? Because that's really what matters most, isn't it? Does he see you? Well, he has. He has sent word. He sees. He says to the Jewish slaves suffering under the armies of Pharaoh, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry." In this psalm, verses 3, 4, 5, 6, the psalmist describes three kinds of danger that a pilgrim in ancient Israel would have encountered on their trip from their village to the city of Jerusalem. And the three kinds of dangers were unstable terrain. They did not have ADA-compliant sidewalks that would take them from their village to the city of Jerusalem. They had no paved roads. They would trek an arduous, unstable path. No guardrails, lots of sharp objects along the way, no hiking boots, a little misstep with their sandals, and a little loose rock with their steps would result in severe injury in some cases, or at a minimum, very uncomfortable scrapes and bruises and bumps and infections as a result of those scrapes. The second kind of danger that is mentioned in this psalm is the harshness of the daytime. "The sun shall not smite thee by day." It's hot in the Middle Eastern desert. Hot. When that sun is high in the sky in that desert, it can be overwhelming. People would suffer from sunstroke, heat stroke. And then the third is the worries of nighttime. Day had its trouble, the sun, and the heat, dehydration. But the nighttime also had troubles, thieves and robbers. But one of the things that in the reading of this song, in the day in which it was written, they would have immediately thought of when they thought of being protected from the moon, is that some people believed that the moon would make you crazy. They called it being moonstruck. The word that we use, lunatic, luna, is from the root for moon. So we still use the term, even though we don't have the superstition. They thought that the rays of the moon would have a negative influence on them. What might these three dangers mean to us? Your biggest danger this week is probably not getting sunburned. Yeah. These are a metaphor. They were a metaphor for them because they had other problems besides slipping and falling and getting heat stroke. These were a metaphor for them, and they are a metaphor for us. Isn't the terrain you're navigating unstable sometimes? Don't you feel sometimes that maybe your boss has too much influence in your life, or the economy has too much power over whether you're going to have a bright future or not, or you just feel like, man, the wrong misstep here. Maybe in a relationship you're feeling, man, if I just wish I knew how to navigate this. I feel like I'm going to stumble. Temptation threatens us with stumbling. I've been thinking during this season that I'm in of what I would describe as midlife a lot more about the finish line of my life and thinking about how important it is that I finish well and remain faithful to my Lord, my wife, my children, the ministry that He's called me to. I want to be faithful, and there's so many things that sometimes can threaten us. I found great comfort in Jude 24. Listen to Jude 24. Now unto Him, it's a tribute of praise. Now unto Him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of His glory with exceeding joy. Good news. I don't need to have the resources within me to arrive faithful. He provides protection from unstable terrain in life. Think about that second kind of protection from the harshness of life or the daytime sun. We live in a harsh world, don't we? I don't know about you, but this world does not like to cooperate with my plans. Stuff breaks, things go off the rails, society's a mess, culture has lost its mind. It's a harsh world to live in. Relationships are harsh. There's anger and resentment everywhere, it seems like. We live in a harsh world. Psalm 91, 1. He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. God will protect you from the unstable terrain in life and the harshness of this life and the worries of nighttime. We would be naive if we didn't admit that we struggle with our thought life. And sometimes it's the worst at night. Laying in bed, unable to sleep, plagued with questions. Anxiety and depression are commonplace in the lives of modern-day believers. It's not some superstitious moonstruck situation, but it's a very real awareness of the fact that we can't operate on autopilot and always find the reserves within us to live on the top side mentally. So we look to God. And what does God tell us? Well, here's what Isaiah the prophet said to God. Listen to Isaiah speaking to God. you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed, whose mind is fixated on you, because he trusts in you. You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is fixated on you, because he trusts in you. Wow. That's what it means to look to God. Do you know you get to choose? One of the greatest powers that you've been given as a human being is the ability to choose one thought over another. And you can choose whether to allow this world or your circumstances to shape the thoughts that you rehearse, or whether you allow this word and this God, who is your protector and who has given you promises, to shape what you rehearse in your mind. We look to God as creator, all-powerful. We look to God as protector, always alert. And third, as we come to the last two verses of the song, we look to God as, this is the best one, companion. He is ever present. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. What does Hebrews 13:6 say? After it says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. It's in your notes. So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear. God's companionship, ever present, always there, right at your side, right over you, governing your life, never leaving you. That companionship is what allows us to live without fear and to know that the help we need is present. Listen to what Psalm 46 says about our God. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. I have good news for you, son or daughter of God. He has committed himself to his children. There's a lot of parents in this room. And as far as I know on the parents in this room, not a one of them would abandon their child. And I know that our Father is a better Father than any of us could ever dream of being. The temptation is for you and me to think that he is not involved. I think sometimes we think of God, which is why we need these verses. We think of God as maybe an executive who created it all, who pushes buttons and pulls levers in some faraway executive office. But that's not how he describes himself, is it? He describes himself as a father and an ever-present helper in your life. And sometimes we think that either he is distant or he has, for some reason, chosen not to intervene in my situation, or, and I understand why we would say that sometimes, because we wait for the help or we look for the answer to prayer and we don't find it. He doesn't always answer our prayers the way we hoped. And he doesn't always make people around us cooperate with the answer to our prayers. But that's not the message of this psalm. The message of this psalm is not about him making other people cooperate with you. The message of the psalm is about him watching over your soul and mine. We sometimes think, well, God is probably going to teach me a lesson by leaving me to the mess I've made. You're not going to find that message in Scripture. Yes, he chastens the sons and daughters he loves. He will chasten you. He will discipline you. But he doesn't abandon you. He never delights at allowing you to go without the help that he is present to provide. Look at all of the qualifiers in verses 7 and 8. He'll keep you from all evil. He'll keep your, so all evil. In case the rough terrain and the hot sun and the moon rays didn't cover any circumstances you're dealing with, he'll keep you from all evil, even the invisible stuff. And verses 7 and 8, he'll keep your soul. So this cuts all the way to the depth of who you truly are, not just the circumstances around you. You're going out and you're coming in. That means no matter what situation you find yourself in, all of the circumstances of life, from this time forth, that is the present, and even forevermore, that is the future, into eternity. This is a total promise for complete protection in every way, at all times, in all places, forever, 24/7, 365. Do these promises mean, then, that we should expect to never trip and skin our knee? Or that the sun will never make us weary, or that the thoughts that we think at night will never trouble us? You could, if you lifted this psalm out of context, think that it is a promise of health, wealth, and prosperity and never having another problem again. But it won't take you long to realize, if you believe that that's not what it promised. If it's true. Think of the lives of people like Joseph, who suffered such injustice year after year. Think of people like Paul, falsely accused, imprisoned, hindered from doing the work that he knew God wanted him to do. Think of the way David dealt with the trouble from Saul, and the way Naomi dealt with grief, and the way so many of our forefathers and mothers in the faith suffered and struggled. So this psalm is not a contradiction to those stories. This psalm tells us something that is still true in spite of the circumstances in those stories, that is also still true in spite of the circumstances that threaten you. And that is that God is with you, and he will grant you the ultimate victory. He will work all of these stumblings, all of these sun rays and moon rays together, and all of these evils that you living in a broken world. He will work all of these things together for your ultimate good in time. He will accomplish his purposes. Your soul will not be snatched from his hands, John chapter 10, and he will give you grace and strength to endure, and he will give you joy in the midst of difficulty, and he will keep you spiritually alive and well until you arrive in heaven, where all will be well in every way. Jesus himself said, in this world you are going to have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Everybody he talked to died as a martyr, but they did it with courage and faith and joy, because they knew the protection that God provided was a deeper protection than from just solving all my problems. A lot of people, that's what they want from God. Stay off my back and solve my problems. Good luck with that. It's not much. That's not a God, that's a genie. That's not someone you worship, that's someone that reports to you. And that's not the God of the Bible, of course you know that. Writing about this issue, Eugene Peterson writes, the Christian life is going to God. In going to God, Christians travel the same ground that everyone else walks on. Breathe the same air, drink the same water, shop in the same stores, read the same newspapers, citizens under the same governments, pay the same prices for groceries and gasoline, fear the same dangers, are subject to the same pressures, get the same distresses, are buried in the same ground. The difference is, we walk each step. Each breath we breathe, we know that we are preserved by God. We know we are accompanied by God. We know we are ruled by God. And therefore, no matter what doubts we endure or what accidents we experience, the Lord will guard us from every evil. He guards our very life. Peterson goes on to say, do you think the way to describe the story of the Christian journey is to describe its trials and tribulations? It is not. It is to name and describe the God who perseveres, accompanies, and rules us. All the water and all the oceans cannot sink a ship unless it gets inside, nor can all the trouble in the world harm us unless it gets within us. I'd like to close with a prayer that I was introduced to that is somewhere around 1600 years old, written by Patrick of Ireland. Most of you know that Patrick of Ireland was a Christian missionary taking the gospel to this region where it had never been. It's a daunting task to be a missionary and to go into uncharted territory. Rugged elements of that day and that part of the world, and the spiritual opposition that always is faced by missionaries. And here's Patrick's prayer. I arise today through a mighty strength, through belief in the Trinity, through confession of the oneness of the Creator. I arise today through the strength of Christ's birth and his baptism, through the strength of his crucifixion and his burial, through the strength of his resurrection with his ascension, through the strength of his descent and his judgment of doom. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's shield to protect me, God's host to save me, from snares of devils, from temptation of vices, from everyone who shall wish me ill, afar and near. I summon Christ to shield me today against poison, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so that there may come to me an abundance of reward. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, through belief in the Trinity, through confession of the oneness of the Creator. And here we are in 2024, and the God of Patrick and the God of the writer of the psalm is your God. I don't know what you'll face today or tomorrow, but don't you dare believe that the help you need is unavailable.